Hello everybody, welcome back. I hope you had a great week and a half break or so. This week we're going to be doing two lectures, one on the senses and one on the endocrine system. We'll be doing the senses first. I do recommend that you look at the notes. Go ahead and print them out ahead of time, even better if you've read the chapter. That way you're kind of on the same page and you know what we're talking about. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know through email. We can also do Skype or FaceTime to review any key concepts that you're having trouble with. There will be quizzes on each of these chapters that you'll be doing next week. So again, take notes just like you would in class. It is really important, especially since a lot of the information is from what I'm telling you rather than just what's on the slide, just as it would be a normal lecture. I will be posting the review sheets that go along with these, like usual. Those won't be graded since I won't be able to see you participating in them. Instead, we'll be doing the discussions as we did before, just so that you guys can interact still as a group. But the review sheets will be there just to help you with the quizzes. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. So when we think about the senses, there are a lot of different types of receptors that are involved. Chemoreceptors sense chemicals, so think of things like sense of smell, sense of taste. Those are sensing chemicals in the things that you smell and the things that you eat. Pain receptors, obviously they help to sense pain. Thermoreceptors sense things like heat and cold. Mechanoreceptors sense pressure, and photoreceptors sense light. So those would be really abundant in the eyes in order for you to see things and interpret the things that you see. Sensation versus perception. So this is a concept that some people get a little confused. So when you're hearing sound, when you're seeing something, the sensation is the data that those sensory receptors are picking up. So if you're looking at a tree, the light waves that come in to your eyes and go to the back of your retina so that you can actually visually see the tree is the sensation. The part of it that's going to the receptors is the sensation. However, in order for you to actually interpret what those things are, you have to have the brain process them first, depending on what it is. So, like we said the last time we spoke about sight, the occipital lobe in the brain deals with sight. So, when you see that tree and you sense those light waves and they're giving you this visual of a tree, your brain perceives it as a tree. So sensation is going to the sensory receptors, and then those tell your brain what they're sensing, in this case light waves, and your brain perceives it and tells you what you're looking at. For sensory adaptation, all of our senses have some degree of adaptation. Things like sense of smell adapt really quickly. And what this means is that over time you might not notice that sense as much when you first noticed it. So in this example, you have two ladies that are walking through what looks to be like a dump. The one lady is really bothered by the smell. The other lady doesn't seem to be bothered. It's likely because her senses have adapted and she can't smell it as much. It's kind of like if you wear a really strong perfume, you might not smell it as much as everybody around you. The same goes for sound. Your sense of hearing adapts really quickly, which is why over time you might not notice something being as loud as you might have had it to begin with, which is why sometimes when you wake up in the morning and go out to your car, it might be really loud, but it didn't sound loud at the time that you were listening to it. So first we're going to talk about touch and pressure, things that you might find in the skin, other parts of your body. So you have free nerve endings pretty much everywhere. Places that have more free nerve endings might be more places that are more sensitive to touch. and more sensitive to pressure. Tactile or Mesner's corpuscles are going to be for light touch. Those are found in the skin. Things that just brush against you, those would be picked up by these Mesner's corpuscles. Lamellated or Pacinian corpuscles, that's what's pictured on the side here. Those sense deep pressure, so anything that is pressing down on the skin, these kind of keep us from allowing things to crush us, to hurt us. They keep us from harm. We also have temperature and pain receptors in our body. There are warm and cold receptors. They differ depending on what the temperature is. There are also pain receptors that protect the body. They're located pretty much everywhere. You even have them on your tongue. Pain receptors do not adapt well, so they don't have that sensory adaptation where eventually you don't notice it anymore. If that sensation does occur where you feel like you don't notice the pain as much if you're having pain somewhere, it could just be because of your heightened sympathetic nervous system that's kind of taking over in that fight or flight mode. But normally, your pain receptors do not adapt well. You still feel that pain over time until it goes away. Referred pain is also known as visceral pain, meaning that it's coming from organs. So sometimes if you're having pain in a specific organ, that can refer to different parts of your body. Think of like a heart attack. Sometimes they say when you have a heart attack, you'll get referred pain to your left shoulder, your left arm, down your left arm, and sometimes into your jaw. Specifically, that's more if you're a man. Women sometimes have more digestive symptoms along with heart attacks. If you're having gallbladder issues, they say that it goes to your right shoulder. Pancreas issues like pancreatitis, it might go to your back. So there's a lot of different referral patterns of your organs. You can see the picture there kind of depicts some of the referral patterns of the organs in your body. So our special senses are what we think of when we think of our senses. Things like smell, taste, hearing, equilibrium. You might not think of that one right away, but that just means our sense of balance, and our sight. So first we'll talk about the sense of smell. Anything that has to do with smell is termed olfaction. So anything that's like olfactory is referring to your sense of smell. So the olfactory receptors are chemoreceptors. That means that anytime that you're smelling anything, it's because the sensory receptors in your nose are actually picking up the chemicals from what you're smelling. So when you're smelling food, there's actually particles of food drifting around in your nose. These end up sending the impulses to the olfactory nerve in your brain, which is cranial nerve number 1. And that sends information to your brain so that it can process them and kind of let you know what you're smelling. It can interpret those things. Sometimes it can even reach the limbic system, so you might have emotional responses to certain odors. Say that there's a person that you miss in your life and they had a certain perfume. If you smell that perfume, you might have an emotional reaction. Like I said previously, that your sense of smell adapts really rapidly, so over time you might not smell something as strongly as you had when you first smelled it. Anosmia is a condition where you can't smell things. This can happen due to respiratory infection, with smokers, with cocaine users, and also with old age. Over time you have a hard time smelling things, which can really impact your sense of taste. It ends up being about 70% of your sense of taste. So the more that you cannot smell, the more you can't taste and enjoy your food. So we're going to move on to taste. Your taste buds are made up of taste cells, and the taste cells are the sensory receptors. They're also chemoreceptors. So again, they're sensing the chemicals that are coming from the food, and that is what you're perceiving when you're perceiving taste. The actual bumps that make up your taste buds are called papillae. If we remember back from the integumentary system, papillae means finger-like projection. So it's like a little bump that comes up out of your tongue, and that is part of what we think of as the taste bud. The taste cell, the individual cells that make up the taste buds, are replaced every 10 days. And that's not very surprising if you think about it. If you burn the roof of your mouth, if you slough off part of your taste buds, say you eat a lot of sour things and it's really raw, it doesn't take very long for those to heal. So like I said, the taste cells are chemoreceptors. They're sensing the chemicals from the food itself. And they actually have these little tiny hairs that stick up out of a taste pore. You can see it over in this diagram. They're little tiny microscopic hairs, and those are helping to sense these chemicals that are coming in from the food. So if you remember from our cranial nerve talk, the facial, the glossopharyngeal, and the vagus nerves, those cranial nerves all have to deal a little bit of taste. Facial is going to deal with the tip of the tongue area for its sense of taste. Glossopharyngeal is going to be the back of the tongue, and then the vagus nerve will be the back of the throat. So all of those have senses of taste. And so once those cranial nerves process these things, they're going to send signals to the brain, and the brain will interpret what you're tasting. There are actually 5 primary taste sensations that scientists recognize: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. So as you can see, there's actually different parts of the tongue that are specific to certain tastes. These taste buds are specific to these taste sensations. It's pretty crazy if you think about it. That's why when you eat a lot of sour things, you might notice the sides of your tongue getting really raw. And then bitter tastes are more in the back of your mouth. That's where the coffee goes, and that's where that taste is perceived. That's why also when you vomit, you might feel that weird bitter feeling in the back of your throat for a while, because that's where all the taste buds for bitter are. Umami, moving back to umami, it's a taste that is specific to savory tastes. So things like soy sauce, well, that's part salty too, but meat, things like that. Anything savory is going to be considered umami. So you might be thinking, looking at all of these tastes, the taste sensations, where is spicy? Spicy is not considered to be a taste sensation. Spicy things actually stimulate your pain receptors on your tongue. So when you're tasting spicy, you're actually tasting, your body's only sensing pain. Which is why certain people don't handle spicy things very well. It's because they have a lower pain tolerance than others. So moving on to hearing, we're going to be talking about the outer, middle, and inner parts of the ear. So the outer part of the ear, the part that you can see, the whole outer, what you consider the ear, is called the auricle or the pinna. Typically it's known as the pinna when you're talking about humans. The external acoustic meatus is actually the hole in your ear, the part that you would stick a Q-tip into. The eardrum is also known as the tympanic membrane. It's going to be where the external ear stops, and that's going to be where the middle ear begins. One of your middle ear bones, the malleus, is going to attach to your eardrum and maintain its shape. See, it has that kind of concave shape looking kind of like a drum, which is why it's called an eardrum. And the reason it's shaped like that is to be able to transmit vibrations that you hear as sounds. So sounds come as vibrations, they travel in waves, and they transmit through your eardrum into your middle and inner ear, and then your body ends up interpreting that as sound. It's kind of a very complex process. The higher the wave, meaning the more amplitude that the wave has, the louder the sound that you hear. The higher the frequency, so the more frequent the waves come, the higher the pitch, so the more higher pitched it sounds. The middle ear has your auditory ossicles. Remember, os means bone, and ickles kind of means tiny. So they're the tiny bones in your middle ear. your malleus, incus, and stapes. They're the tiniest bones in your whole body. You have 3 in each ear, so those are part of your axial skeleton. They're going to transfer vibrations from that outer ear to the inner ear via what's called an oval window. So they're pretty much just connecting that eardrum to the inner ear in order to transmit those vibrations so that you can hear sounds. It's really complicated, but it's really cool, honestly. So you also have what's called the auditory tube. It used to be called the eustachian tube, but they're trying to move away from naming things after people. So the auditory tube is what connects your middle ear to the back of your nasal cavity, which is called your nasopharynx. That would be important to know. The importance of that is that it maintains pressure on either side of your eardrum. So think about when you're on a plane and you're getting higher and higher and your ears feel like they really need to pop. It's because they need to balance out that pressure because of the rise in pressure from increasing elevation. So you can also think of your auditory tubes are the reason why kids need to get tubes put in their ears when they're really young. If they get a lot of ear infections, it's because those tubes sit at kind of a horizontal line rather than more vertical as adults. So it's hard for them to drain and they end up getting a lot of ear infections. So the eustachian tube is really important also for making sure that there's not a ton of fluid sitting in that middle ear to cause ear infections. The inner or internal part of the ear contains what we call the labyrinth. A labyrinth means like a really complex maze, which makes sense because look at it. It looks crazy. It looks like something that you'd find in an Alien or under the sea or something. It looks crazy. So parts of this labyrinth are the semicircular canals and the cochlea. The cochlea is what you kind of think of when you think of people who are deaf. They get cochlear implants, so they're getting implants to improve its function. There's also what's called a spiral organ, which used to be called the organ of Corti. It contains all of the hearing receptors. So remember when we were talking about taste, the taste cells were the taste receptors, and those were found right on the tongue. For the ear, the hearing receptors are all the way in the inner ear, so the job of the external middle ear are just to transmit those sound waves so they can get all the way to that spiral organ so that it can get to those hearing receptors so that you can process what you're hearing and send those signals to the brain so that they can interpret it. There are also these tiny little hairs that are in that spiral organ. They move, and that's what creates these, transmits these vibrations and creates sound in your brain. So that was hearing. Let's talk about the sense of equilibrium just a little bit. So remember, when we're talking about equilibrium, we're talking about balance. If your sense of equilibrium is off, that's when you get things like vertigo or dizzy spells, when you feel like the world's spinning around you or your head's moving and you're not moving it, or motion sickness. All of these things are problems with your sense of equilibrium. So static equilibrium. Static means stable. You're not moving. So in both of these cases, equilibrium, these sensors are found in the inner ear within this labyrinth in what's called the vestibular system. For static equilibrium, it's informing your brain of your head position when you're not moving. Because if your head was sideways, your eyes have this tendency to want to look at the horizon. So, like you might have noticed when you're looking at your phone and something is turned sideways, you have a tendency to tilt your head to look at it the right side up, right? That's because your brain wants your eyes to be looking at things straight on rather than sideways. In the inner ear, you have what's called the maculae, and those are your sensory receptors for static equilibrium. That'll be really important. For dynamic equilibrium, dynamic means moving. Also located within the inner ear, but it tells your body where your head and body are and how to balance them with sudden movement. So Playing a really big part in this is the cerebellum, as we talked about the last time we had lecture, because the cerebellum is responsible for preparing your body for movement and keeping you balanced. So having this information about balance and where your body and head are located are really important in maintaining that balance and being able to prepare for those movements. So one of the last senses we'll talk about is our vision. So the parts of our external eye include our eyelids, our upper and lower eyelids. They're going to protect our eyes from things like dust and pathogens. We also have conjunctiva. They're little membranes that cover our eyes. If you have an inflammation of those, conjunctivitis, that's what's called pink eye. And that's an inflammation of those membranes, an infection usually caused by some kind of bacteria or virus. Your lacrimal gland sits internally above your upper eyelid, but it has these ducts that come down into your inner canthus over here. And your lacrimal glands and ducts and all of the things that are lacrimal in origin have to do with producing tears. So that's what causes tearing of the eyes. Sometimes if those are blocked, if they're plugged, if they haven't been used in a while, you'll get those crusties in the corner of your eyes when you wake up. And a really easy way to manage that is just to toss a tea bag on your eye over your closed eye, or like a cucumber. That's why they do those things, in order to unblock your lacrimal ducts and glands. You also have extrinsic muscles. Those are going to move your eye, move your eyelid, things a lot of that sort. And remember, those are controlled by certain cranial nerves of your brain. So the outer layer of your eye, you have your cornea. It's what's known as the window of the eye because it's what lets in the light. You also have the sclera. That's going to be the white part of your eye. The pupil, which is the black part of your eye. Light goes through the pupil and back to the retina, which is going to be in the inner layer of the eye. And the sclera is going to be circling around the whole eyeball. So you can only see the front part of the sclera because that's the part we can see. But if you rolled your eyes to the back of your head, you'd still see white because the sclera is continuous throughout your eye. In the very, very back of the sclera, the optic nerve pierces the back of it and connects the eye to the brain. The middle layer of the eye has the choroid coat. As you can see here, it's this red part right inside the sclera, and it's going to nourish the surrounding tissues. It has blood vessels. The ciliary body is going to be the thickest part of the middle eye, and it's secreting what's known as an aqueous humor. So that's just a fluid that is in place to maintain pressures of the eye. It also helps to hold the lens in place, and that will also be really important to know. The iris is also part of the middle layer of the eye. It's the colored part of your eye, and it's surrounding the pupil, right? It surrounds the dark part in the middle. It's got muscles that help to regulate the size of the pupil, so your eyes might constrict when you have light going into them and dilate when light is more low. The lens can actually move in order to accommodate to look far away and to look up close as well. And there's no fluid within the lens, so that's also really important to know. The lens is just a little disc, and that's what helps you see. So if you have a problem where you need glasses, if you're nearsighted, if you're farsighted, if you have astigmatism, those are all problems with your lens, which is why you get lenses for your glasses. The inner layer of your eye, you have the retina, and it's the very, very back of the eye. It's very highly vascularized, so there's lots of blood vessels back there. Which is why it's really important if you have retinal detachment, if that part of the eye starts peeling away, it's really important that that gets taken care of quickly, because if it doesn't, it could lead to blindness, because a lot of your photoreceptors that have the sensory receptors for vision are located in the retina. So without those, you wouldn't be able to see. There's a part of the retina called the fovea centralis. It's the area of the sharpest vision. That's also going to be really important to know. There's the optic disc right in the middle of the back of the retina. That's where the nerve fibers are going to leave the eye and form the optic nerve. It's also called the blind spot because, as you can imagine, it being a blank disc of just nerves, there's no photoreceptors back there, so in that very spot you wouldn't be able to detect light and be able to have the receptors send signals to the brain to interpret that. Also in the inner layer of the eye is the vitreous humor. So we have the aqueous humor in the middle part of the eye, and you have the vitreous humor in the inner layer of the eye, and it's going to be another liquid that's just going to help maintain the eye's shape. You have two different types of photoreceptors that are in the retina, rods and cones. Rods are important for dim light. Cones are important for color vision. So rods cannot see color, which is why when you're seeing in dim light, say you have the lights off in your house and your eyes accommodate and you're able to see a little bit in the dark, you can't really see anything in color, right? You only see things in like a black and white grayscale. But for cones, they can't see in dim light, but they see for color. The way I remember that is cones and color both start with a C. So that's it for the senses. So go ahead and move on to the endocrine system, and we'll talk more about the senses in our discussion for this week. Let me know if you have any questions. Go ahead and send me an email or set up a Skype session or a FaceTime session with me, and we can review some of the concepts if you have any questions.